Today, we're exploring an often underestimated aspect of team dynamics: how active listening can turn conflict from a disruptive force into a catalyst for innovation and progress. We've all seen how team tensions can stall momentum, drain energy, and create divisions. Yet, when those same tensions are met with skillful listening, something shifts. Instead of escalating into blame or silence, conflict becomes a doorway to understanding, to learning, and to stronger collaboration. Let's walk through practical techniques for applying active listening in the middle of conflict and highlight why these capabilities are even more critical as we integrate AI, where understanding and misunderstandings and misalignment often emerge before systems or structures can catch them. So first, let's think about what the nature of conflict is and how does it play out in agile teams, in AI teams, and let's understand conflict itself. And the first thing to note is that conflict in itself is not a dysfunction, doesn't necessarily have to be a dysfunction. It can become toxic, absolutely, and it can create toxic work environments, no question. But in itself, conflict is not a dysfunction. It's a signal of engagement. And when handled well, it drives innovation. It fuels conversation. It fuels exploration. It fuels different perspectives. Conflict arises when we have different perspectives coming together. And we all like to be right. So we'd like to establish that our view is the right one. Okay, let's nuance it a little bit. No, maybe there are elements of different perspectives that on the surface are very different. However, if we bring the best aspects of all of them together, we have something that's better than the whole of them. So this is a real opportunity for teams, and high-performing teams experience more conflict due to diverse perspectives and the high commitment levels that they have. And high-performing teams are very passionate. They're very engaged. They're very invested in what they're doing. And therefore, they bring this passion into their conversations. And because people have different perspectives, it's inevitable. They will run into situations where they disagree and conflict will arise. I'm reminded, some time ago, I was working at a place where the leader for the group, the head for this area, they had a very interesting perspective. Their family upbringing and culture presented to them a perspective that conflict is necessary. If you're not in arguments, you don't really care. You're not really invested. So they always wanted to see this real rough exchange happening during meetings. And let me tell you, those meetings, boy, wow, there were fireworks all the time. It was really, really contentious. So maybe that was a little bit more towards the toxic end of the spectrum. That said, there is a kernel of truth, and there was only good intentions. There was never any bad intentions, but there is definitely a kernel of truth. As people were encouraged to bring up their passions about something, their beliefs, their perspective, and this was viewed as a positive in the organization. We definitely got to talk about a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ways of doing things, and in the end, what we were producing was really good because we had considered so much. Everybody had an opportunity to bring their perspective, and that made what we were producing that much better quality. So when you add that perspective and that way of doing things and that passion and those the plurality of opinions and views, when you combine that with agile practices, which by nature they offer the forum for these conversations to happen, whether it's retrospectives, planning, or stand-ups, you always have an opportunity to discuss. When we do that, we surface tensions earlier. And with good facilitation, we can really make them very productive. That's with good facilitation. If we don't have good facilitation, they can explode. So we've got to be careful. There's a real fine line. We're skirting right at the edge of chaos here. And when we have good facilitation and we have good support and the psychological safety, we can definitely leverage this conflict in a positive way to give us the best results possible. If left unresolved, yeah, these tensions fester. They create silos and can quietly derail entire initiatives, especially when complexity is high. And that's certainly the case with AI work. So, active listening can be a conflict transformation tool. Most conflict resolution fails because people listen to reply, not to understand. And that's a very critical difference. We're sitting there just eager and waiting for opportunity to put our perspective in. And all the time that we're formulating our response, we're not listening to what the person's saying. We may be hearing it, yes. If somebody asks us, "Is what they just saying?" We may be able to repeat the words, but did we internalize them? Did we consider them carefully? Did we put them through our own personal filters and our biases and challenged our biases as we're listening with an open mind to truly process what was said? No, we were stuck in our own thoughts and what we were going to reply as soon as we heard a moment of silence. That's what's really happening. And when we're doing that, we're just listening to respond, not to understand. We really miss the opportunity to explore what was just said. Sometimes we end up repeating things that had just been said because we weren't really even hearing what was being said. So it's very dangerous when we land into these scenarios. There's another thing to consider is the chemistry of the brain and what's happening. Neuroscience shows us that feeling heard deactivates the brain's threat response and restores collaborative potential. So the moment that we engage in active listening, which does this, which establishes a framework for people to feel heard and understood, what we're doing is we're really shifting the conversation and we're shifting people's minds in a place that they can be more collaborative and they can be more creative as opposed to being defensive. Active listening creates a space for psychological safety, shifting people from that defensiveness into engagement. And that's exactly what we want to see. We want people with their passions and their different perspectives coming together and having a good, productive, useful conversation. This practice reinforces the respect pillar the respect in the four pillars of Agile. This is what we use in this channel to refer to the foundational pillars that are needed to develop a good Agile culture. And this respect pillar is what helps teams reframe conflict as contribution rather than opposition. When we are listening to somebody and we're truly internalizing what they're saying, it's a form of respect. And by doing that, we're opening the door for this good conversation and meeting of the minds, as opposed to just being in this competition with each other. Now, when we talk about AI context, misunderstanding intent, especially from stakeholders and engineers, can quickly amplify into crisis unless active listening intervenes early. That's why we need these skills so that we prevent the escalation, the increased complexity in our interactions due to miscommunication and misunderstanding. So practical techniques for conflictive conversations, and what can we do? Well, the first thing is start by agreeing on intent. You can say things like, let's make sure we both feel understood before we try to solve anything. So establish that honoring people's perspective, people's stances, people's views is important before we solve anything. Well, let's not jump into the solution. Let's not jump into declaring who the winner is. That's what keeps us in conflict. Instead, let's keep the conversation going and alive with the understanding that we want to understand each other. And that's where we're saying things like, help me understand, or what's important to you in this that we're discussing. These are things that are demonstrating that we want to hear from the other person, as opposed to already having made up our minds and whatever they say is not going to make a difference, it's not going to shift the needle in any way. Our body language is really important too. Many times we lean in too far, and there may not be any negative intention, but that physical action, going in, that can really be perceived as a threat, as bullying, and people are going to go into defensiveness. That's not demonstrating that we're listening. That's more of a posturing. If we're pointing, and we're telling people, that's going to turn people off. or crossing our arms, for example, or demonstrating that we're not interested, potentially looking away, looking at our phones. Any number of physical expressions, things that we're doing with our bodies, can communicate that we're not really listening, we're not really engaged. Also, interrupting or not giving people time to speak. We're not saying that you having the forum, you having the platform to speak is important. We're not giving them a chance even. So one technique that we can use is what's called echo back. And all that it is just paraphrasing what the other person said and ask if we've understood correctly. Now, this is not just about parroting back word by word what somebody has said. It's us giving our interpreted version with our words, with our style, with our perspective, and saying what we think we heard, seeking confirmation. And ideally, the person is going to say, oh, yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Or they might potentially say, oh, hold on a minute. No, that's not what I meant. I meant this. And then there's opportunity for clarification. So in having conversations, we want to keep a balance between advocacy and inquiry. There's a balance stating, there needs to be a balance between stating our views and having genuine curiosity about what other people are saying. There's nothing wrong with stating our perspective. In fact, that's what we want to see. We want for team members to volunteer and offer the good things that they have in their mind and have curiosity about what others have to say. Many times when people do this sincerely, many times people will reshape their perspective. They may be the ones who come back with a revised version of what they originally offered after listening to others, because they understand their perspective. And now that they understand others, they can nuance and fine tune their original statements in a way that it fits in with everybody else. So it's going to be very, very productive. These techniques help to de-escalate the conversations before misunderstandings turn into derailments. And this is critical because AI introduces new things. For example, roles and processes. This is all new stuff and changing stuff that can feel very threatening. So it's particularly important when we're working in AI, acknowledging that people are under this kind of pressure and these kind of perceived threats. If we introduce active listening, that can help alleviate a lot of that and deflate potentially escalating situations. Now, facilitation is a really valuable skill for teams to have. And this is so valuable. This is the reason why many times teams will have either Agile coaches or if they're following Scrum Masters, but there's somebody in the team who is helping to model active listening and create ground rules that normalize it during team sessions. So that way, when tensions arise, people can leverage that. Oh, they can remember, oh, when past situations, when we had something similar, I saw the coach do, I saw the Scrum Master do, or the service delivery manager do this, and that helped. Or very directly helping people through the effort. Facilitation, there's several stages that go through it. And the first stage, you're talking about offering multiple perspectives. This is where we want to gather people's thoughts, different views. And this is a moment to be completely open. This is a moment to make it safe for everybody to offer, volunteer their thoughts into the conversation, because we're building a pool of shared knowledge. Don't have to agree, just simply have to offer it. So the facilitator makes certain that during this phase, everybody is welcome and has an opportunity to speak. This is a good moment for people who are naturally very quiet to invite them and say, well, do you have something to offer? Is there something that you'd like to contribute to the conversation? That's the moment to do it. And then once you have all of the perspectives on the table, facilitation then moves into what some people call the groan zone. This is when the conflict can arise. This is when it's okay to go and present a, no, that doesn't make any sense. And hey, this perspective is better than the other one. This is when you want to have that animated conversation. And having going through it, it's so important to do it in a respectful way. Again, active listening is really important there. The emotions can be there, and we can be respectful. And when we engage in active listening, we're demonstrating respect. We can be energized, engaged, animated, and respectful at the same time. These things are not mutually contradictory. Okay. So when we do that, we get safely through this grown zone. And then we can now finally move into what's called the convergence period of the conversation. Facilitation will help that, where you start making selections. You start trimming down from all of the possibilities that have been discussed, really boil it down to what is going to be actionable. So that's the process of facilitation. And it's so important when we're engaging in facilitation, when somebody's helping us through it, to remind people to engage in this active listening, because that's really going to help, especially if they're in a critical and potentially explosive grown zone. Another thing that you can do in your team is developing agreements for conflict conduct. Now, whenever a conflict arises, so for example, no blame. Don't finger point. Don't look for somebody to put the blame on. Instead, look for solutions to the problems that the team has. This is not about individuals. This is about the team has a challenge to overcome. Let's focus on that as opposed to figuring out whose fault is it. Regardless of whose fault is it, the team has a challenge. Let's solve the challenge. Let's focus on that. So that can be a team agreement, to avoid that blame and focus on the solutions. Use I statements instead of you statements. This is a cultural thing to consider. Many cultures that don't have English as their first language, they can oftentimes fall to the trap of using you, second person plural, as a way to diffuse. And unfortunately, we don't perceive it that way. We perceive it as a very direct accusatory statement. We say, you blah, blah, blah did. That feels very accusatory. So we've got to be careful. Sometimes culture, despite all intent, can trigger a defensive response that really wasn't intended. So we've got to be careful of the words that we use. The safest is use I. Now, I believe, I see, my perspective is. That's usually safe regardless of whose culture we're talking about or primary languages. And always paraphrase what you hear. So make it a rule for the team, an agreement in the team, to always paraphrase what the key important things. It's not about repeating the entire conversation. It's about the key points, the decision points, paraphrasing them from your perspective. The more people do that, and the more team members do that, the more we get to hear, are we in alignment, yes or not? And the sad truth is that despite best efforts and despite following this, the reality is that we will still fall into misunderstanding and miscommunication. That's just the nature of human communications. However, these practices reduce the likelihood or the severity of it and give opportunity to arise disagreements and where we have disconnects much earlier than if we don't engage in these practices. So we want teams to know when to address issues in group versus one-on-one. This is so important. Oftentimes, people forget that you're in the middle of a conversation with a lot of people in the room, and we're bringing in emotion, and that can derail really quickly because people are going to defend themselves. That's natural. So it's good to exercise some mindfulness and consider this issue that we're going to talk about, that I want to talk about. Is it better to just talk one-on-one? And when we do it one-on-one, there's a greater opportunity and a greater probability that we will engage in active listening, as opposed to being in a group setting, in a highly emotional conversation. It's less likely that we'll be mindful enough to engage in the active listening. So that's one thing to consider, is when to do things one-on-one and when to do them as a group. And the other thing to remember is that this takes time. Okay, building conflict competence takes time. So you want to start by normalizing reflection after any disagreement, even minor ones. When we make it okay to take a moment, to step back and to consider what's been said, and then rephrase it, paraphrase it, come back and more discussion. When we demonstrate that this is the way of doing things, then we have a greater opportunity to be able to resolve them without escalation or before things escalate. Now, where AI is concerned, this brings in new conflict patterns. How AI acceleration creates new tension points is something that we really need to keep in mind. As AI becomes integrated into the workflows, it often disrupts established roles and routines, and that leads to fear, resistance, or confusion about responsibilities, value, or relevance. People can feel really threatened, and that makes us less likely to really engage in listening. It's more about protecting ourselves and saving ourselves. That's at least our perception. And we can address that if we engage in practices like active listening to address people's concerns and whatever fears they may have or anything that's on their mind. Even subtle automations that AI can that we can benefit from can shift a perceived status or authority within the team. People who previously were viewed as the go-to person, the one that was always there to save the day, the one that was the most helpful, all of a sudden, because the things that they were doing have been automated, or we've come up with solutions that have automated things as a group, now there's a perception that they're less valuable. That can be really threatening to people. We need to be mindful about that and understand that AI is shifting the power relationships within teams. We can talk it the hierarchies within teams. Ideally, we've taken steps to eliminate the hierarchies so that this is less of an issue, and be realistic. If you do have them, be mindful of that. The people who before felt that they were in a very strong and stable position and safe position in the company may now be feeling very exposed, very threatened, and that can make them more prone to defensiveness and not listening. So be aware of that and be mindful of it. Otherwise, if we ignore it, we risk igniting power dynamics that might not have existed before and may not be necessary if we just simply engage in active listening so that we understand what's happening. Active listening to uncover the fears that people have and the concerns about AI can really help people feel more comfortable exploring this new Wild West that we're all going through. Team members hesitate to voice their unease about AI because they fear looking like they're outdated or maybe uncooperative. Active listening makes it safe to surface these concerns and talking about it. We can say things like, tell me more about what's behind the concern, or what's your sense of how this might impact your work? This can really open the space for honest reflection rather than silent resistance. We can use conflict data as a way to better implement AI. So what I mean by that is that decisions aren't just interpersonal. They're signals of misalignment between the humans in the picture here, of the processes that we're following, or the emerging technologies that we're using. So listening closely to whenever there's this conflict can reveal blind spots about what's happening. This can be a real canary in the mine that's signaling that something is off. And if we pay attention to that and we take care of it through active listening, then we can avoid implementing something that the same feeling and discomfort that was happening in the team that led to the conflict could translate into our customers also feeling uncomfortable. And if we ignore that, then that potentially could derail our product or service that we're putting together. So paying attention to how the team is feeling about the implementation, watching for the conflict, what is the nature of the conflict, addressing it could be a way to ensure success of the service or product that we're developing. When somebody pushes back or expresses frustration, it may highlight where the AI tool doesn't yet support the team's real world needs, or where Fallout failed to include human context. We could be too focused on the technology, on the implementation, and forgetting how it's serving humans and how it's serving potentially mankind. So again, listen to the conflict. Where is it happening? What's the nature? What's underlying it? Have the conversations. Use active listening to help you understand what's truly going on, because that can be the thing that prevents putting out something a new AI product that has ethical issues or safety issues. So these could be the early warning signs.
Don't miss out on the opportunity to leverage those. So, which technique are you willing to give a try this week? How do you see this active listening helping you? And do you think that it's a particularly helpful thing to use? Is it always safe to use? Consider that too. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let's talk about that in the comments. And if you'd like to learn more about how small actions can nurture respect in teams, click one of these. I'll be happy to tell you all about it.